The alarm did not swell. It engaged flat, clinical, final. Within the last hour, the 3i divided by Atlas dashboard advanced from amber to red, and a single line moved across the internal feed. Alert validated, escalation authorized. In Houston and Pasadena, duty officers stood as chairs, slid back, and timelines froze. NASA Scrambles here is procedural, not theatrical. Pointing plans are paused, dwell time is reallocated, and a narrow window begins to close one careful minute at a time. What crossed the line was not loud, but it refused to decay. A narrow signature persisted where background should have remained smooth, surviving the filters built to erase it. Red in this system is not a mood. It is a contract. It states that the cost of waiting now exceeds the cost of being wrong. The trigger does not tell a full story. It forces a sequence, verify the source, challenge the models, spend attention like a limited budget. 3 questions anchor the night. What exactly did 3i divided by Atlas see, and how reliable is that site under stricter subtraction? Why would this pattern matter enough to justify a red line when lesser colors are cheaper? What must be done before the window closes again so that tomorrow's certainty is earned rather than declared? Michio Kaku steps in to translate engineering into consequences and consequences into choices. Method will lead, narrative will follow. 3i divided by Atlas is not a single instrument, but a disciplined network. Orbital platforms, ground arrays, and vetted partner feeds are braided into one field of regard, then treated as a test range. Its charter is blunt: reduce surprise. It does not chase headlines. It watches for small, durable departures from the ordinary deviations that still stand after instrument drift, seasonal habits, and human optimism have been subtracted with prejudice. Diversity is a feature, not an ornament. Some nodes watch heat, some shape, some motion that looks like noise until persistence makes it interesting. Cadence is layered by intent. Fast loops harvest coarse cues every few seconds. Slower loops pull high-fidelity frames when the fast loops twitch. Latency is a tax, so the architecture pays in advance, prefetching reference frames, caching calibrations, and keeping a reserve of dwell time for moments when minutes suddenly matter. Data arrive raw and are made humble before they are made useful. Health checks clear the plumbing. Calibrations remove yesterday's fingerprints. Backgrounds are modeled and peeled away. Bias is corrected, and outliers are shaved when the air or geometry would otherwise exaggerate them. On top sits an ensemble of anomaly scorers. None carries the room alone. Together they argue, vote, and produce a traceable score with a path back to the first pixel. Observability is a map of responsibilities more than a pretty wall of dials. One panel tracks leading indicators, variance growth, spectral roughness, unexplained periodicity. Another tracks the error budget, a running account of doubt still available to spend. Drift monitors sit alongside, asking whether the system is observing the world or rehearsing its own habits. Providence trails hang behind each gauge. One button replays the last hour without any clever processing. The handoff to NASA is engineered to be dull and therefore reliable. Alerts ride on redundant paths and land on duty consoles where a human signs for them. A short playbook follows scripted prompts, minimal debate, clear authority to pause, pointing plans, and free bandwidth. Rehearsals are frequent enough to feel native, rare enough to avoid fatigue. When red appears, it does not start an argument. It starts a checklist already agreed upon. By habit, the network speaks quietly. On most nights, it writes to itself. On few nights, it asks for help. On the rare night, it asks for help now. That rarity is part of its currency. A red state does not certify what a thing is. It certifies how urgently it must be seen again. Tonight, the mesh judged that the price of delay exceeded the price of embarrassment. That is why schedules bent, links cleared, and the window narrowed. The ignition did not arrive as a spike, but as a hold. A narrow feature rose a fraction above the night's floor and refused to relax. First, the persistence score crosses bar, then the cross-sensor consistency line, then the change rate test against local background. Thresholds in this system behave like a lattice. One tug begets another. When the voting cleared, the pipeline stopped treating the sighting as curiosity and started treating it as work. Confidence was earned by subtraction. The dull questions went first. Clocks behaved, gain stayed inside tolerance, pointing matched the guide solution. Health telemetry offered nothing dramatic to blame. A shadow replay removed the latest calibration and reran the scene. The feature survived. A ghost trial injected synthetic clutter to tempt the models into chasing it. They declined. Doubt narrowed through routine hygiene rather than rhetoric, which is the only kind that lasts until morning. Hour one objectives were written in calmer weeks. Verify the end-to-end source path. Task an independent look with different failure modes. Pull a short archive slice to test for an unnoticed prelude. Ping partner nodes for a yes or no that costs them minutes, not meetings. Above all, spend attention deliberately. Windows are budgets, not moods. Once spent, they do not return. And indecision is a form of waste no one reimburses. Cross-checks moved with practiced economy. A ground array swept the region with a coarser beam and found a cousin signature fainter, broadened but aligned. A polar orbiter, off-angle and late, reported mostly quiet. Even that silence mattered, because a bold falsehood would have been loud from that seat. The stack of evidence grew asymmetrically. One direct sighting, one supportive whisper, and one bounded quiet that trimmed unlikely geometries. Competing explanations were open like files. Instrument misbehavior leads by policy, then boring environmental transients, then natural sources that impersonate intention, then intention that borrows nature's clothes. Each file had tests. If hardware is at fault, a small thermal nudge should move the feature. It did not. If the sky is merely capricious, neighboring bands should flutter. They stayed still. The latter shortened as easy exits failed to carry their weight. Risk framing took its usual three axes. Impact asks what follows if the feature marks a real actor or a rare event with scientific weight. Probability asks how beliefs should update as negatives accumulate. Time asked how quickly the opportunity decays compared with the pace of verification. Red lives where the cost of delay grows faster than the cost of embarrassment. Tonight, that curve steepened early, and the plan for waiting grew harder to defend. Why red and not amber? Because the anomaly resisted the common solvents, because an unrelated eye rhymed with it, because the off-angle silence fenced the case rather than erased it, and because the window was already spending itself. Red does not bless the extraordinary. It obligates the second, third, and fourth look while the looking is still cheap. The ignition stayed small on purpose. The response, size to the window, could not be. Zero was recorded when the fast loop watcher twitched twice and then held. The scheduler siphoned a thin slice of bandwidth, ordering a mid-fidelity stare instead of a roaming scan. That stare planed the night into a disciplined baseline and left one stubborn rise standing like a rivet after sanding. Buffers were snapshotted, provenance tags attached, and the next act was the same careful ritual as always. Try to dissolve the sighting before inviting anyone to care. The first irregularity was texture rather than height. Spectral roughness slipped beyond its usual corridor, a fine ravel at the edge of an otherwise obedient band. Background models did their courteous work subtracting, smoothing, refitting, yet the ravel persisted. Persistence scoring stiffened from curiosity to posture. A guarded gate opened and granted a high-resolution pull, rationed like fuel. The feature survived the promotion from sketch to line, which is when small things begin to matter. Noise hygiene came early and stayed late. The instrument's thermal dither walked through its allowed steps. The feature did not dance with the chassis. The pointing solution was nudged, then tied to guide stars. No forbidden parallax appeared. Power rails sketched straight lines, clocks kept clean time, and housekeeping channels refused to confess a single sin. Boredom is the preferred outcome of these audits. Boredom leaves the anomaly alone with its story. Agreement arrived from a distance. A partner dish, older optics, broader beam cut a diagonal through the same patch and reported a cousin signature, weaker and widened by design. Cousins are not proof, but they defeat alibis. Cross-correlation tolerated mismatched apertures and still found rhyme. The cross-sensor score stepped past the line that converts speculation into task. The world felt less solitary, which is a strange comfort when the question is severe. History was asked to testify. Libraries of former nuisances and once mysterious visitors were seated and polled. Slow solar mutters did not fit the cadence. Ionospheric flourishes lacked the timing. Catalog satellites failed the phase test. The classifier, pressed to misrecognize on purpose, pushed the candidate toward familiar boxes and then returned it unsorted, apologetically. When yesterday's tricks refuse to claim a newcomer, the room grows quieter and the ledger grows heavier. The third irregularity was a hint of a beat, not a proud metronome, more a shallow breathing, swell and thin tracking, neither known rotational schedules nor atmospheric tides. Periodicity tests walked the tightrope between sensitivity and superstition, returning probability with a shrug and numbers with restraint. Weak structure tempts overreach. The ensemble wrote it down, refused to crown it, and carried the debt forward. Hints become currency only if they refuse to default. Error budgets were reprised as if an audit might begin at sunrise. Thermal subtraction still left too much. Pointing and calibration drift were priced and could not pay the balance. Clock wander did not explain the remainder. Residuals were compared with a family of lies. Instruments tell under pressure. The resemblance was missing. Doubt thinned from blanket to scarf. Scarves warm a point, not a case. The price of disbelief rose with each subtraction. Time helped and hindered in alternating turns. The feature waxed, then held, granting schedulers an excuse to keep the stare and analysts a reason to mistrust patience. A late pass by a polar orbiter arrived off-angle and reported almost nothing. That nothing carried shape. It bounded geometry and implied a narrow corridor of visibility. If a bold falsehood were at work, the orbiter would have contradicted in kind. Absence sketched a contour as tangible as presence. Geometry moved from suspicion to instrument. Boresight vectors from the two looks intersected over a map of usual illusions. The crossing point avoided the infamous neighborhoods, no bright terrestrial side lobes, no accidental alignments along crowded belts. Parallax, corrected for altitude and look angle, declined to call the feature a nearby prank. With each correction, the scaffold creaked, accepted another beam, and settled. Hard problems grow domesticated by such carpentry. Health telemetry continued its steady lullaby. Firmware was unaltered. Buffers did not spill, counters did not hiccup. Temperatures stayed in their narrow lanes. Operators often hope the instrument will confess. It is a relief to blame oneself. Tonight, mercy was not available. Providence chains remained intact enough that an auditor could begin at raw frames and end at the same question without cursing a missing step. Clean trails can be as unnerving as dirty ones. Peer review on a sprint is not pretty, but it beats solitude. Tight pings went to small circles, carrying trimmed frames, masks, and minimal framing language. Replies were brief. A yes, a guarded maybe, a no that softened after one more calibration file landed. The goal was not consensus. It was hygiene by opposition. If a quick skeptic could crack the case, the window should be returned to everyone. It did not crack. The window narrowed. Belief did not leap, it climbed. After the first irregularity, priors shifted a little. After the second, a little more. After the third, reluctance had less room to sit. A Bayesian could sketch it in symbols. Operators sketched it as cost. Each brick did not guarantee a building, but one could trace the outline of a house without squinting. Outlines pull posture forward. People stood because the drawing on the table stopped looking like noise. The stack was written as a ledger with hashes, not a legend with adjectives. Item 1, persistent roughness that resists customary solvents. Item 2, a cross-sensor rhyme from hardware with different sins. Item 3, a shy periodicity that refuses to vanish. Item 4, off-angle quiet that prunes geometry rather than erases the case. Item 5, health lines that decline to share blame. Each item carried a path back to first pixels and first timestamps. A decision skeleton followed the ledger, not the verdict, the architecture of one. If the stack reflects a real source, additional looks are valuable and decay quickly. If the stack is hallucination, extra looks are cheap insurance against avoidable lore. The playbook tilts toward motion when opposing stories demand the same immediate act. Outsiders call that a scramble. Insiders call it the next line of a checklist that was settled in daylight. What mattered in the end felt undramatic, a ratchet that refused to back off. Each click held when someone applied caution as a wrench. The operators dislike theater. Theater spends attention poorly. They prefer what survives boredom signals that keep shape when no one argues for them. After many unglamorous checks, the candidate kept its outline. Anomaly became plural, plural became stack, stack became the reason schedules bent and the sky for a while belonged to this question. The next entry in the ledger arrived as absence. From one vantage, a companion sign should have answered a sideband, a faint shimmer in the adjacent corridor that usually echoes when its partner speaks. It stayed quiet. That quiet drew a boundary as clean as a shoreline, marking where the event was not. In this architecture, silence is not an empty cell. It is a measured outcome with units, thresholds, and a place in the audit trail. Null results were converted into limits rather than shrugs. Analysts estimated the minimum strength a real companion would need to be seen at that angle and cadence, then fenced off everything below that line. Geometry and sensitivity maps turned the no into ruled out terrain. Each ruled out slice narrowed the remaining latitude for yes. The posterior tightened by subtraction. No new photons, yet less freedom for the hypothesis to wander. The quiet pruned families of explanations, common atmospheric wanderers typically tugged neighboring bands. Those bands held steady. Instrument burbs tend to spill into housekeeping spectra. Those spectra remained boring. Catalog satellite mischief drags a chain of harmonics behind it. The chain never appeared. By refusing to echo, the pattern announced what it was not. The remaining stories had fewer exits and a higher bar for surviving the next look. Caution sat beside the conclusions in the same ink. Coverage maps are never perfect. blind corners emerge from geometry. Seams between time slices can shelter coincidences. Space weather reporting can lag for minutes that feel larger in hindsight. A sensor can be healthy in aggregate, yet unhelpful in one narrow posture. These holes were logged with coordinates and clocks so that later confidence would not be borrowed from early optimism. Silence earned equal billing in the balance sheet. It fenced the problem, simplified the search, and lowered the odds of popular detours without pretending to certify nature or intent. With boundaries drawn, operations could point with less waste and argue less about where not to spend minutes. The plan that followed was smaller and more urgent. Catch the rise on the next pass, test the corridor, the silence implied, and let the next measurement speak as plainly as this one did. NASA's Scrambles unfolded as choreography, not spectacle. The first move was retasking. Routine survey timelines were paused, freeing dwell time for a concentrated stare with instruments that fail in different ways. Priority lanes on deep space links were cleared and a fenced compute pool was held for rapid reprocessing. Nothing rolled to a pad. The theater was schedules and sockets where minutes spend like cash and do not return. Option A, bought speed by re-aiming eyes in orbit and ears on the ground. The gain is simple, better signal quality now. The debt is equally plain, borrowed hours from campaigns that are expensive to reschedule. Solar programs do not idle. Planetary alignments are miserly. Every hour of retask glass is an hour stolen from promises inked months ago. The upside is a cleaner verdict tonight. The downside is science deferred and letters of apology drafted in daylight. Option B, widen the circle through standing calls to international partners. The advantages are diversity of aperture, orthogonal failure modes, and the mercy of triangulation. The friction is procedural, data rules, differing duty cycles, and the polite politics of who gets to look and when. Cooperation pays, but seldom in seconds. The plan therefore asked for crisp yes, divided by no returns, and avoided any requests that required a committee. Option C argued for restraint. Hold posture, collect longer, let the stack harden before spending rare chips. False alarms have their own gravity. They pull credibility forward and let it fall. Waiting is virtuous when time is cheap. Tonight, time was not. The window was already decaying, and the cost curve for delay outpaced the growth rate of easy evidence. Discipline, in this case, was movement, not stillness. Logistics wrote the margins in small print. Priority links have ceilings, and burst traffic pushes into guardrails. Tasking collisions must be resolved by named humans with clear authority. Contention systems were engaged to keep the pipes honest. Archive tiers pre-warmed so that cold frames would mount without stutter. Duty officers issued one-time exemptions where neatness blocked truth, each exception logged with a reason and an expiry. Communication traveled beside operations at a deliberate distance. The external line stayed sober, additional observations underway. Internally, language remained contractual. Read is a duty to look, not a license to opine. Media appetite was noted and left unfed. The standing rule was spoken aloud. Metaphors do not make decisions. If the signal climbs, story will follow the math. If it collapses, the record must show that restraint was policy, not luck. Belief moved in accountable steps. Each fresh look adjusted a quiet chart only a handful could see before morning. The cross-sensor rhyme persisted through the first retask. The shy periodicity stayed shy, consistency of a modest kind. The off-angle, quiet trimmed geometry further. None of this crowned a theory, but the posterior crept, and the slope on the do-nothing cost line steepened beyond what planning could ignore. Operations added a margin note while the work continued. The playbook held. Shadow replays on time. Partner pings tight. provenance intact, no model allowed to be clever in private. Gaps were named with the same candor. One sensor's thermal dither remains too slow for fast fades. One archive mount is brittle under concurrent pulls. One rehearsal script assumes weekday staffing. These become budgets and fixes when the clock returns to ordinary. A near-term decision gate was posted where everyone could see it. In 1 hour, the team would step down to amber with a plan to rewatch on a later pass, or escalate breadth by bringing assets that require rarer signatures to move. Criteria were written in nouns, not adjectives. Persistence beyond one full cycle under stricter subtraction. A third independent rhyme from hardware with distinctly different sins, or a decisive fail by any health metric that implicates the instrument. Costs were penned beneath in the same ink. Lost hours from priority programs, partner fatigue, and the reputational price of being early and wrong versus late and blind. The resolution, being provisional, measured success not by drama but by auditability. If action continued, it would do so because the stack earned it under rules that were visible and testable. If the state relaxed, it would be because evidence failed to mature before the window did. Either way, the scramble kept faith with the charter, spend attention with receipts, price time honestly, and leave the next window fewer places to hide. The next window is counted in minutes, not months. A follow-on pass aligns near local midnight when thermal backgrounds soften and course watchers gain headroom. Schedulers reserve a longer dwell using 2 narrowband looks and 1 broadband sanity check. Ground arrays will slew early to catch the rise, not only the crest. If the feature returns on that clock, the ledger gains teeth. If it fades, the case must learn to live with less and write down its claim. The watch list is short and testable. First, persistence across 1 full cycle under stricter subtraction. Second, a third independent rhyme from hardware with very different failure paths. Third, a structured sideband that survives detrending across adjacent corridors. Any decisive health anomaly earns a clean demotion to amber. A pass on 2 of 3 promotes broader tasking for 1 night. The rules are blunt, so the choice is audit-proof and unhurried by metaphors. Open questions are written as tests, not as slogans. Is the shallow beat a property of the source or a pacing artifact we have not priced? Does the off-angle quiet argue for geometry, spectrum, or simple indifference? If nature is speaking, which family does this voice belong to? If intention is speaking, what incentives would hide in one corridor and ignore its neighbors? Each question has a bounded experiment and a clock that will not negotiate. Transparency remains policy, not decoration. Provenance chains will ship with the verdict, together with masks, dither logs, and minimal subsets for independent reruns. Replication is slower than rumor, yet it is the only remedy that ages well. The team would rather be corrected in 4 days than celebrated for 4 hours and revised in 4 weeks. Discipline is a kind of courage, and courage is cheaper than mythology when the record is read later. This is where Michio Kaku steps from caption to compass. He frames the stakes without borrowing certainty. Modern observatories are designed to be surprised safely. They assume nature keeps tricks and people make clever mistakes. A red state is therefore a budget choice, not a confession of belief. Extraordinary claims are purchased in ordinary steps, 10 careful looks, 1 careful sentence, and then quiet until the next look pays for more speech. Until the window opens, posture holds, and invention rests. The checklist remains the narrative. The narrative remains provisional. If the signal returns, tonight's restraint will make tomorrow legible. If it dissolves, the record will show not caution that cost discovery, but method that price time honestly. In both endings, the charter stands, reduce surprise, spend attention with receipts, and leave the future fewer places to hide when the next window arrives.